Hey everyone, welcome back. Philosophy 1301, Philosophy 1304, whatever other class in the future I end up using Bergson in, or if you're just visiting me online on YouTube, it's good to have you here. This is part six, so we are on page 158 out of 169, and I got some sleep, so I'm fresher again. I can probably move through this faster. Um, and yeah, we've covered a lot of the meat of Bergson's text. I think from here he's going to give us some kind of signposts and maybe try to conceive of some propositions and principles. Um, let's go to get this shared. And some of this isn't super like the reason I say that we've gone through the meat of it is that I think there's two more pages that I find are important, but I actually cut a lot of the next 10 pages for my class last semester. So because we're moving online, we have the space to dig into it instead of having to take time to read it in class. Um, but I think that it clarifies things, but he's also responding to like Kant and other stuff in the history of philosophy. So I find that it's not as accessible for the first thing you do in Intro to Philosophy. Depending on what other class you may be taking, it might be more interesting to you, depending on what your own background is in philosophy. Um, all right, so we're here. Let's see how far we can get. I mean, some of this stuff I don't even know, right? Like, I am vaguely familiar with um, Kant, for example, like the transcendental unity of apperception, uh, that the mind imposes time and space on noumena. I understand that much. I vaguely understand the grounding for the metaphysics of morals, and I don't, not vaguely, I teach it. We'll take it later in the semester. But I haven't read the Critique of Practical Reason, and I know some about the mutual quickening of the intellect and the imagination and aesthetic perception from the Critique of Judgment. But beyond that, I don't have close readings of Kant. I'm not a Kantian. Um, I do think that. Um, I can't remember who said it. I think it was Deleuze. There was something about how Kant didn't quite take his project all the way. He made it kind of messed up early on by trying to ontologize his goals. Um, and he was seeking an immanence, but he didn't get to immanence. I think it was Deleuze. Or I haven't read enough Whitehead lately. Anyway, that's enough time for talking and building a relationship. That's why I'm not like always super focused is when I'm just talking to you, is because um it's really hard to build a relationship just in a one-way communication. Some of these videos are meant for asynchronous online models. I know I have at least one section of that coming up this fall. Um, so hi, if that's you. Um, but my hope is that it's not frustrating because it takes a lot of time, but is more so just like chill. Uh, yeah. Okay, let's read. So hopefully you have your text with you. Hopefully you're following along in my copy, marking up some annotations, underlining things, pausing and thinking where you need to. All right. And I'll try to explain things and explain words as I was doing before. So let's get into it. I'm gonna push the time today and go to another 50 minutes after this, actually. We'll do 40. We've been going for like 5 to 10 minutes. Um, let's go for another 40 minutes. We cannot stop here to outline the various stages. Oh yeah, so this movement, the movements between intuition, between unity and multiplicity, between um, rationalism and empiricism, the one and the many, um, zero and infinite. The one becomes so vague that it's nothingness itself, eternity of death, and the many become so minuscule and particular and specific to the thing, but also common because it's a concept. Um, but they become so particular that they don't refer to anything at all, right? It would be really interesting to think about the relationship between particularity, non-reference, and universality. Because at the same instant that they become a concept where they refer to nothing well, at the same instance they become so particular that they refer to nothing. Um, is it just that there are two ways to refer to nothing, or is it that a concept that the specificity of this particular green? I think it's that. I think that the specificity of this particular green starts to exclude even that green itself. Um, but when we talk about it in the form of a concept, uh, and we say that green tells you what it's not, the specificity of green is excluding everything outside of it, like non-green, yellow, red. Um, but no, there does seem to be slightly different logic there. I just want to say that it's two different directions on the same kind of um, logos, I guess. Eidetics. You should think about that. Anyway, movement back and forth between those two extremes. John Dewey has those extremes as well. Um, he calls them different things at different points, but like too much fluidity versus too much stasis. Um, the fluidity is kind of like the one, and the stasis is like rigidity and mechanical. Um, yeah. We cannot stop here to outline the various stages of this movement, but after having presented a general view of the method and made a first application of it, it will perhaps be not without point to formulate in as precise terms as possible the principles upon which it rests. Of the propositions I am about to set forth, most have received in the present work a beginning of proof. I hope to demonstrate them more completely when we attack other problems. All right. So, one, these propositions. There is an external reality which is given immediately to our mind. Common sense is right on this point against the idealism and realism of the philosophers. So instead of there being like phenomena separate from noumena, that's the kind of Bergson actually here is aligning with phenomenological givenness, the givenness of the world, the givenness of perception. Um, and this allows us to get past, I mean, it is grounded in the cogito ergo sum, so it is phenomenological, or it's first philosophy, let's say that. Um, we may not want to commit to an entire tradition of assumptions. Like for example, when I interpret, we may not want to have like a classic phenomenological reduction. The phenomenological reduction for me is how Bergson uses it, which he says that um, we develop intuition through a long comradeship or camaraderie with life's superficial manifestations. So by elongating the interval of perception across more of your life, you start to pattern recognize longer. And this is what Descartes wants us to do when he suspends disbelief or when he suspends belief in assumed propositions from his childhood in the first meditation. Um, and this is what phenomenologists do when they want you to like not jump to an assumption or a conclusion that thinks it knows what causes the phenomena and therefore closes down actual perception by labeling it or reducing it to a name or a theory or some other kind of analytic reduction. So in a way, holding open intuition actually is the phenomenological reduction. Didn't know I was going to get there. This reality is mobility. There do not exist things made, but only things in the making, not states that remain fixed, but only states in process of change. Rest is never anything but apparent or rather relative. This is what I was saying. So this cup that's been sitting here for a while, or I mean, the stuff that you see in my office behind you, behind me, that you see in the office behind me, um, is it's been mostly in the same place, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't been mobile or that it hasn't endured or that it doesn't have concrete duration. Apparent or rather relative. The consciousness we have of our own person and its continual flowing introduces us to the interior of a reality on whose model we must imagine the others. So up here previously he said that orange might think that there's only its own color in reality, but it can actually, if it pays attention and it opens and it listens and it does the effort of imagination, the dilation of sympathetic dilation of the mind, uses intuition, what have you, it will feel its phasing into red and yellow, um, and dovetailing, impinging. Or these are words that Bergson himself uses. I don't think he uses phasing. Uh, do not exist things, but only things in the making, not states that remain fixed, but only states in the process of change. So states are what we capture when we perceive the process. Things are what we capture when properties bundle in consistent ways. Um, Not properties, but qualitative perceptions, direct perception, the givenness that we experience from one. And then, yes, it introduces our own intuition of our own flowing through reality, my life, the experiences I've been through, the experiences you've been through, each time for each one, mine, each time for mine for you, right? You use the word my, whatever the first person is for each first person experience, which there are many of. That internal experience, that interiority is had by objects as well, by the phone, by the cup, by the mouse, by the computer, by the chopstick, by the book. Um, yeah, he's very explicit about it. All reality is therefore tendency, if we agree to call tendency a nascent change of direction. Again, if everything's in process and we're just capturing positions through the mind like holding them in place falsely, falsely holding them in place, then what reality actually is a lot of processes and tendencies. Makes sense. Our mind, which seeks solid bases of operation, point departure, which I think means like point of departure, has as its principal function in the ordinary sense, in the ordinary course of life, excuse me, to imagine states and things. Now and then it takes quasi-instantaneous views of the undivided mobility of the real. It thus obtains sensations and ideas. But that means it substitutes for the continuous the discontinuous, for mobility stability. For the tendency and process of change, it substitutes fixed points which mark a direction of change and tendency. This substitution is necessary to common sense, to language, to practical life, and even to a certain extent, which we shall try to call, or which we shall try to determine, to positive science. Our intelligence, when it follows its natural inclination, proceeds by solid perceptions on the one hand and by stable conceptions on the other. It starts from the immobile and conceives and expresses movement only in terms of immobility. It places itself in ready-made concepts and tries to catch in them, as in a net, something of the passing reality. It does not do so in order to obtain an internal and metaphysical knowledge of the real. It is simply to make use of them, each concept, like each sensation, being a practical question which our activity asks of reality and to which reality will answer, as is proper in things, by a yes or a no. Does it succeed or does it fail? But in so doing, it allows what is the very essence of the real to escape. 4. The difficulties inherent in metaphysics, the antinomies or contradictions it raises, the contradictions into which it falls, An antinomy is an opposition from the same starting point that seems to show that the starting point is shaky. Something is going awry. We don't know what it is. Kant had antinomies. The antinomy of like freedom and determinism, for example. The division into opposing schools and the irreducible oppositions between systems are due in large part to the fact that we apply to the disinterested knowledge of the real, the coherence, the universality, the original starting point. We apply to that the procedures we use currently with practical utility is the aim. These confusions are due principally to the fact that we place ourselves in the immobile to watch for the moving reality as it passes instead of putting ourselves back into the moving reality to traverse with it the immobile positions. They come from the fact that we claim to reconstitute reality, which is tendency, and consequently mobility, with the percepts and concepts. Percepts are, they're not perceptions. I think they're the things you perceive. Yeah, the object of perception, the recipient of perception. So here's a good moment to talk about transcendence versus immanence. The relation between the thing perceived and the perception, is it one where the perception can exist without the thing perceived, and I can grasp onto different things that are perceived? Or is it one in which different things that are perceived constitute the act of perception, and my consciousness would not exist without those things? Does the environment construct my experience, or does my experience grasp onto anchor points in the environment? And I think that latter view is more Kantian, is more transcendental. Um, and I think the immanent view makes more sense for people like Bergson. But I'm not sure that he's following it all the way through. He says something like percepts. I'm not sure that he's acknowledging the way that the real constitutes the self, which have as their function to immobilize it. One will never create mobility. Or maybe what he's saying is that when you use percepts, you're putting yourself in that position of transcendence that grasps onto the reality instead of instead of seeing yourself as an expression, an elemental expression of the flowing of nature. Thinking that the rest of the durations come from my duration rather than the truth, which is that my duration comes out of all durations. One will never create mobility with halts, however numerous, right? So again, if you have just a plethora of durations, you can't get them together. It's only when you realize that my duration comes from all of them. And this is a bit transcendental too, because you're saying that something you have the experience of depends on a state of affairs beyond which you can experience, which is Kantian, a transcendental critique. Um, One will never create mobility with halts, however numerous. If one begins with mobility, one can draw from it through thought as many halts as one wishes. In other words, it is understood that fixed concepts can be extracted by our thought from the mobile reality, but there is no means whatever of reconstituting with the fixity of concepts the mobility of the real. Dogmatism, as the constructor of systems, has nevertheless always attempted this reconstitution. So I try to say in my classes that the point of this is dialectic, not doctrine. Doctrine is like these are the concrete takeaways from this thinker. Um, I approach an emphasis on dialectic by pointing us to the primary source and then processing that with linguistic reasoning, commentary, discussion, explanation, summarization. Um, and that's not to say that I still wouldn't put this into a multiple choice exam, right? Um, the point of this is to develop the person, not to find answers. And so it's to develop each individual's capacity for intuition, not for intuition to solve a problem, solve this problem, solve that problem. And It's nice when we have the solutions to the problems, but they won't make sense if you're not developing, if each individual doesn't develop the capacity for intuition as well. Uh, so yes, you should find solutions, but they can't, the system, the um, the capital can't hold all the answers forever. Um, the products of labor. Only human capital could do that, and it has to be continually grown with each generation. This is what Aristotle calls like embodied reason or like virtuous reason, reason as virtue. Um, to think of reason as something that you have to practice and that uh, anyway, we're spending too much time. Five, it was bound to fail. This is the impotence in this alone pointed out by the skeptical, idealistic, and critical doctrines, all those doctrines, in fact, which question our mind's ability to attain the absolute. But it does not follow from the fact that we fail to reconstitute living reality with concepts that are rigid and ready-made, that we could not grasp it in any other manner, such as intuition. The demonstrations which have been given of the relativity of our knowledge are therefore tainted with an original vice. They assume, like the dogmatism they attack, that all knowledge must necessarily start from rigidly defined concepts in order to grasp by their means the flowing reality. And so what I was saying too is that I'm not sure if Bergson's um, desubjectivating his philosophy enough. He might be an entry point where you're like still first person, still I subjectivity, still your mind is still primarily relating from an individual perspective. Um, and because of that, something like this starting point, grasping the outside world, those percepts, right? But once you're in it, you should really flip it and see that the percepts construct. So what I was talking about elsewhere with there's Whitehead, Alfred North Whitehead. I didn't mention his by name, but he argued that prehensions or the qualities or phenomena in the world are what we grasp and synthesize through concrescence um, into not a transcendental unity of that perception, but um, a syncretic um, coalescing concretion, I guess. Concretion is probably a good word for it. Um, but he basically says that whatever we feel or experience in the grasping is not ours. It is the second order experiencing on what phenomena or quality or experiencing is already there in the world. So when I experience or when you experience, I'm wearing a green shirt, by the way. It may be hard to see that it's green, so we can talk about green. When you experience the greens, these two different greens, Descartes or most Cartesians, I'm not sure if I read Descartes differently, but most dualistic Cartesians um, think that the greens are only in the mind and that we put those into a container world with mathematical proportionalities and mechanism and causal mechanism that can be predicted and controlled completely. There's no green in this. I don't know why I'm holding it. Sorry. There is green and some gum, but whatever. These two greens. Um, for Whitehead, uh, the green is in the thing, and this green is in the thing, and I'm just experiencing all those different things at once, whatever they are already experiencing, but they don't have something like sense organs or a mind or a memory system to organize or self-reference their own perception. And so they don't get any recursive, um, like I guess you can kind of think of the ways that binary computer programming can become more complex. Um, the more it can recursively construct around a massive multi-million node system. Um, like if it can compute all those things quickly enough, a computer chip. So I'm talking about like a motherboard and a chip system. Um, then you don't program in binary language anymore. You program in compiled languages. So computer programming languages are compiled. So I guess compiler is what I'm looking for. Um, in a way, not all of consciousness, but human existence compiles the consciousness that's in matter for Alfred North Whitehead. Now, Whitehead's not crazy. Whitehead's not like a kook or anything like that. Whitehead developed the foundation of mathematics with Bertrand Russell. Principia Mathematica is Whitehead. So the foundations, I think, is like set theory and formal logic. Um, comes out of this guy. Like he was working with quantum mechanics and trying to resolve these tensions. And Deleuze does work with Whitehead and Bergson, and Mitsumi works out of them too. I wish I had more of the math background personally. I think I would feel more sure about what I'm saying if I have that background, because I don't think I'm lacking in the philosophy. But I feel like it's just so incredible and fascinating and unbelievable, um, that I'm like, no, this is real, guys. This is so cool. No, we were on five. Attain the absolute, grasp it in any manner, an original vice. Yeah. But the truth is that our mind is able to follow the reverse procedure. It can be installed in the mobile reality, adopt its ceaselessly changing direction, in short, grasp it intuitively. But to do that, it must do itself violence, reverse the direction of the operation by which it ordinarily thinks, continually upsetting its categories or rather recasting them. In so doing, it will arrive at fluid concepts capable of following reality in all its windings and of adopting the very movement of the inner life of things. Only in that way will a progressive philosophy be constituted, freed from the disputes which arise between the schools, capable of resolving problems naturally because it will be rid of the artificial terms chosen in stating them. To philosophize means to reverse the normal direction of the workings of thought. Another pithy takeaway. Did I use that right? Yeah. This reversal has never been practiced in a methodical manner, but a careful study of the history of human thought would show that to it we owe the greatest accomplishments in the sciences as well as whatever living quality there is in metaphysics. The most powerful method of investigation known to the mind, infinitesimal calculus, was born of that very reversal. Modern mathematics is precisely an effort to substitute for the ready-made what is in process of becoming, to follow the growth of magnitudes, to seize movement no longer from outside and in its manifest result, but from within, and in its tendency towards change. In short, to adopt the mobile continuity of the pattern of things. Some really lovely language. The mobile continuity of the pattern of things. It is true that it contents itself with the pattern, being but the science of magnitudes. It is also true that it has been able to realize these marvelous applications only through the invention of certain symbols, and that if the intuition we have just mentioned is at the origin of the invention, it is the symbol alone which intervenes in the application. The origin of the invention. The symbol alone intervenes in the application, right? Like you use the communication of the translation to integrate it into the world or with the world, but it's not like absent, separate from the world to begin with. It's just you will have to translate it into symbols in order to transform the world with it, by it. But metaphysics, which does not aim at any application, can and for the most part ought to abstain from converting intuition into symbol, right? If when I'm contemplating or meditating or reflecting or doing metaphysics, I'm developing a facility and processing information and asking questions, which sometimes uses language internally to jump from thought to thought. But for the most part, I try to process without that. This may feel religious to some people. I don't want to call it religious. I don't want to say that it has to be religious. I don't want to bring atheistic ire into the discussion. I also don't want to bring religious ire into the discussion. Um, I will say that historically in Western philosophy, the absolute is God. In Spinoza, nature is God. The total intuition of concrete duration is God. Now, what that means beyond that is, I think, personal. Um, Exempt from the obligation of arriving at results useful from a practical standpoint, it will indefinitely enlarge the domain of its investigations. What it will have lost with regard to science and utility and occurrence, it will regain in scope and range. If mathematics is only the science of magnitudes, if mathematical procedures only apply to quantities, it must not be forgotten that quantity is always nascent quality. It is, one might say, its limiting case. Quality is primary. We, it's developing, it's growing, it's changing, and we capture it before we've finished seeing how it will change and what it will turn into. We've captured it before it can become something else. Because quality is always that transformative flowing over. Um, Dewey says something very similar. Dewey says that he contrasts reduction and perception between intuition and analysis, or recognition and perception between analysis and intuition, where aesthetic perception or pure perception or real perception involves following the present experience and letting it change without imposing a predefined structure onto it. In recognition, you take the present experience, you say, I know that thing. I recognize it. It goes into this category I already know. Oh, this green thing is green. I don't notice the unique green to it. Um, Again, if you say, oh, Dewey is just like Bergson, then you miss what he has unique. If you say, oh, Bergson is just like Dewey, then you miss what Dewey has that's unique. Um, But yeah, you capture the nascent quality before it can become what it will be. You take the present experience and you reduce it to something that you quantify or think that you could categorize. You think that you already know it before you transform it into what else it could understand or become. This is the way that consciousness gets closed down too. Um, by simplifying your life, thinking you've got things figured out, you actually limit all the ways that you could expand your experience with the time that you have available to you, the duration you have available to you. It is, one might say, it is therefore natural that metaphysics should adopt the generative idea for mathematics in order to extend it to all qualities, that is, to reality in general. In so doing, it will in no way proceed to universal mathematics, that chimera of modern philosophy. I believe universal mathematics is like a universal language. In Leibniz sought a universal language, which could be the logical codification of all causal relations, tendencies, and properties in the world. So what is the unit? What is the underlying reason and rationalism beneath? What is the structure of reality? Kind of. It's a sort of structuralism, an interior structuralism. I think that's what he's talking about here. Universal mathematics. And yeah, you can see in my annotations on the side, I put Gödel's incompleteness theorem. So you can go look that up, but you can translate Gödel's incompleteness theorem to reality itself. It just says that I believe the three properties are that it can't be at the same time complete, closed. So I think that's the same. Um, and it's the second incompleteness theorem. I don't want to be here. I want to be on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Sorry. Um, because that's in my syllabus, I tell students not to use AI, which is a classic thing, like don't use Wikipedia. I use Wikipedia. I think it's good for getting um, multiple perspectives, um, kind of general perspective from different countries, even. But yeah, use Stanford. So for any consistent system, the consistency of F cannot be proved in F itself. Any consistent formal system. So formal, consistent, and complete. Those are the three properties. You can't have all three. A system of axioms equipped with rules of inference which allow one to generate new theorems. Okay. So a formal system is one that has a starting set um, of assumptions, principles, or truths that you can then get other things out of. Finite or at least decidable, an effective method for mechanically deciding what is true and what's not. Um, that's not the point of this. How does that relate to Bergson? I put it in I think Gödel just kind of further proves that the universal mathematics is difficult and really should push us to think of reality as open-ended, expanding, indeterminate. The pets are petting. I heard Winchester whimpering, and then I see Sophia and Winchester walk down my hallway. It's kind of fun when they follow me around. She stays under my feet all the time. Okay, let's keep going. Quite the contrary. As it makes more headway, it will meet with objects less and less translatable into symbols. But it will at least have begun by making contact with the continuity and mobility of the real, exactly where this contact happens to be the most utilizable. It will have looked at itself in a mirror which sends back an image of itself, no doubt, very reduced, but also very luminous. So there is something to that structure of reality. That's the intuition of concrete duration in a way, that interiority that everything has as it flows and affects one another. It will have seen with a superior clarity what mathematical procedures borrow from concrete reality, and it will continue in the direction of concrete reality, not of mathematical methods. Let us say, then, with all due qualifications to what might seem either too modest or too ambitious in this formula, that one of the objects of metaphysics is to operate differentiations and qualitative integrations. So the actual final sentence in Bergson is the integral of experience, l'expérience intégrale. So it's the whole of experience. And so what he's saying is, how do you operate metaphysical integrations? That goes where we were. Um, the objects, the goals, the objectives, to operate differentiations, so to carve distinctions, and qualitative integrations to see what's common or the same, uh, including across bodies, including across experiences. So a qualitative integration is what happens with a sympathetic dilation of the mind. It is world traveling, transformation. In a way, you're integrating yourself. You are augmenting your consciousness to transform into something greater. These differentiations and integrations go well too with John Dewey's rhythms of rupture or discord, differentiations through strife, through conflict in an environment, and reintegration with one's environment, or um, harmonization or consummation, where you survive the struggle, you adapt, you grow, and through growing, you're able to field or marshal a greater diversity of rhythms of conscious experience. And so there's a greater aesthetic harmony in your perception on a daily basis through marshaling these different diverse rhythms of consciousness. Okay. What has caused this? I'm going to pause for a second. Sorry, one second. All right, I didn't get up or anything. I just wanted to monitor Sophia for a minute. My cat. She's a domestic long hair. I guess that's what the vet told me. I think she's like a ragamuffin. She's gray and white, clingy, just like rag dolls on you. She's big. I rescued her. I love her. I think she's old. Um, yeah, y'all didn't have that break though. So y'all are probably still focused on what we were just talking about, the differentiations and integrations, Dewey. We're getting on to like 45 minutes. So let's try to get down to nine and then I'll close it. We're right there. Eight. What has caused this object to be lost sight of and misled science itself about the origin of certain methods it employs? Is that intuition once grasped must find a mode of expression. Yep. And that is going to reduce it or capture it or make it analytic. An application which conforms to our habits of thought and which furnishes us in well-defined concepts the solid basis, point upper Q, we so greatly need. That is the condition of what we call strictness, precision, and indefinite extension of a general method to particular cases. So James actually talks about how certain precision is required or expected in exactitude is um, humans, all humans, there's a populist sort of demand in reason for both exactitude and open-endedness of mystical experience, and calls it ontological wonder sickness. If we have all the answers, we get sick of not being able to wonder after more answers and what it all means. Okay. Um, Now, this extension in this work of logical perfectioning can be carried on for centuries, while the generative act of the method lasts only an instant. That is why we so often take the logical apparatus of science for science itself, forgetting the intuition from which the rest was able to ensue. This is also why dogma happens, why doctrine happens, why each when in Kant says that so often each generation has to throw off the yoke of unreason and have the courage to think for themselves, to trust their own ideas, to commit to their truths, enact their truths, have courage of their convictions, right? Kant says that Hume woke him up from his dogmatic slumber. That's a famous line in philosophy. Um, but what we see over and over again is that Kant, if you just read Kant, Kant can become doctrine too. Um, but even Bergson can become doctrine if you don't go to intuition, if you don't practice it and learn to trust it and just move, keep keep moving. All that has been said by the philosophers and by scientists themselves about the relativity of scientific knowledge is due to forgetting this intuition. Relative is symbolic knowledge through pre-existing concepts, which goes from the fixed to the moving, but not so intuitive knowledge, which establishes itself in the moving reality and adopts the life itself of things. This intuition attains the absolute. If you think that he's just repeating himself, it's because you haven't gone to find this experience yourself. You should have this experience. Uh, a claim without your own experience grounding it will always feel like a baseless claim. But there is an experience that you can access and find which will justify the truth of these sentences if you're in that position where you think it doesn't make sense. Science and metaphysics then meet in intuition. A truly intuitive philosophy would realize the union so greatly desired of metaphysics and science. at the same time that it constituted metaphysics and positive science. I mean, progressive and indefinitely perfectible, so an ongoing process of improvement and perfecting. It would leave the positive sciences, properly speaking, to become conscious of their true bearing, which is often very superior to what they suppose. It would put more of science into metaphysics and more of metaphysics into science. Its result would be to reestablish the continuity between the intuitions which the various positive sciences have obtained at intervals in the course of their history, and which they have obtained only by strokes of genius. Reestablish the continuity between the intuitions with the various positive sciences, or which the various positive sciences. So the great scientific discoveries are due to intuition. We don't have as much of them as anymore because we stopped having the intuitions connected to science. And when we can get back to an intuitionistic method between the sciences and philosophy, when scientists are using intuitionism, right? Not just philosophers using it, but scientists using it. And they understand this is their grounds. So this is the introduction to metaphysics is not for metaphysicians, it's not for um, philosophers. It's really actually for scientists and politicians and teachers and craftsmen and everyday workers who are looking for more meaning in their lives and for more understanding and more connection. And then that'll produce these aesthetic creations, which also produce more significance and meaning because the things that we are experiencing are all related to other things that other people are experiencing. But yeah, which they've obtained only by strokes of genius. So then we can also hopefully find more purposive solutions in our product designs if you're still a capitalist or trying to create things for other people. I mean, everybody, you don't need to be a capitalist to manufacture, to have products. Um, okay, that's where we're going to cut it today. That is plenty of material. I'm going to, full disclosure, clean the litter box because it got used while we were recording. Gross, I know. Um, I'm sorry, I can't control when she does that. Uh, but because of the whimpering, I'll take Winchester out again. It'll take time for the video to process. I'll upload it. Get into the last one. Do nine in the last few pages. It's literally just like 7 or 8 pages. I think it ends on 169. We're about to start 163. So that's just 7 pages. Plenty of time for 45 minutes. Or 45 minutes is plenty of time to cover that 7 pages. All right, thanks for being here, guys. If Winchester, come here. Cards are already on the screen, I'm sure. Get up here. Come on. Oh, come on. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh, bye, guys.